No one raised their hand. The silence in the auction hall wasn't respectful. It was cruel. A silence that judged, that discarded, that decided without needing to say a word. I stood in the center of the stone platform, under the cold light of the torches, feeling each gaze weigh upon me as if it were a sentence already written. Omega, the auctioneer announced impatiently. Low-level healer, no pack, no family, no active blood tie. He didn't say my name. Names don't matter when someone has already been classified as lost. Some alphas shifted in their seats. Others looked away, as if staring at me any longer might infect them with the same weakness they saw in me. A low laugh echoed from the left. I didn't need to look to know where it came from. Any offers? The auctioneer repeated, now with less patience. My heart was pounding so loudly I was sure everyone could hear it. My hands trembled even though they were bound by the thin chains that were supposedly just for protocol. The floor was icy beneath my bare feet, but the greatest cold came from within. Nothing. No hands raised. No coins offered. No dispute. I wasn't rejected by a specific alpha. I was rejected by the entire system. Come on, gentlemen, he insisted, forcing a smile. Even a weak Omega can still be useful for something. The word serve echoed within me like a blow. An elegant alpha whispered something to her mate and laughed. A young alpha assessed my body with open disdain, like someone analyzing defective merchandise. I lowered my eyes, not out of submission, but because facing that required a strength I no longer possessed. That was it then. The moment when I officially ceased to be someone. If no one offered anything, I would be handed over to the council. And everyone knew what that meant. Forced labor. Experiments. Silent disappearance. The kind of fate that leaves no body to mourn. The auctioneer opened his mouth to end the session. That's when the doors to the hall slammed shut with a dry bang. The sound was so intense that it made everyone turn around at the same time. The air changed. The smell changed. And for the first time that night, the silence wasn't one of rejection. It was out of fear. My name is Ava. I thought about this while standing motionless on the platform, as if silently repeating my own name was the last thing that still belonged to me. Not that anyone there was interested in hearing it. To them, I was just another worthless Omega, an inconvenient statistic in a system that doesn't tolerate fragility. I always knew where I fit in, or rather, where I didn't fit in. I was born in Omega in a small village, far from the centers of power, where alphas ruled with an iron fist and little patience for those who didn't serve a clear purpose. From an early age, I learned to speak softly, walk without drawing attention, and accept what was given to me, or taken away. Expecting more than that always seemed too dangerous. When my pack broke up, no one came to ask if I had anywhere to go. Omegas aren't consulted. We're redistributed, relocated, pushed from one territory to another, as if we were a logistical problem. I survived by becoming useful. I learned to heal because it was either that or disappear. Hands soiled with herbs, sleepless nights, wounds that never appeared in official reports. I was never the best, never exceptional, just enough. Enough not to be discarded immediately. And yet, there I was, alone, on display, for sale. Part of me wanted to scream that I wasn't useless, that my hands had already saved lives, that I felt pain, fear, hope, even if it was a small amount. But another part, older and more tired, whispered that no one listens to an Omega when she tries to defend herself. Maybe that's why I didn't fight. Maybe that's why I accepted it. Because when the whole world teaches you that you're worth less, you start to believe that anything, even the worst, is still better than being nothing. Before we continue, check if you're already subscribed to the channel and leave a comment telling me where you're watching this video from. I always like to know how far these stories reach. The kingdom of Varkon was not sustained by brute force. It was maintained by the normalization of cruelty. From puppyhood, everyone learned the same immutable truths. Alphas lead, betas serve, omegas adapt. It was repeated in schools, decrees, and public ceremonies, always with beautiful words like order, balance, and collective prosperity. But no one needed to explain what happened to those who didn't fit in. Fear did that job. After my pack disbanded, my name was recorded in the Central Council's files. A red stamp next to it indicated my new status, Unbound Omega. From that moment on, I ceased to be a full citizen. The rules were clear and irreversible. An Omega without a pack could not reside alone in Alpha territory. They could not own land, enter into contracts, travel between kingdoms, or refuse an official appointment. Every step required authorization. Every deviation was punished as an affront to the hierarchy. Running away was never a real option. The borders were guarded by sentinels who didn't ask names. They only smelled fear. Omegas captured while fleeing didn't return to public records. Officially, they were relocated. Unofficially, no one dared ask. The auction was presented as a merciful solution. It's better to be chosen than appointed, they said. Chosen by whom? For what purpose? The truth was too simple to say aloud. The auction merely transferred responsibility. If an alpha bought an omega, the council washed its hands of it. Destiny ceased to be a matter for the state and became private property. What if nobody bought it? I shuddered just thinking about it. Unsold omegas were classified as unallocated assets. They could be sent to remote fortresses, research centers, or forced labor in inhospitable regions. There was no appeal. There was no trial. There was no return. I knew this because I had treated some of them before. Women who returned, a few, with empty stares, scarred bodies, and shattered souls. They never spoke about what happened. They only trembled when they heard the word, council. That's why I remained motionless on the platform. That's why I didn't shout. That's why I accepted the scrutinizing gaze, the stifled laughter, the public indifference. It wasn't submission. It was survival. The system didn't need to chain me with iron. It had already done that with laws, tradition, and collective silence. And while everyone believed that night would decide only who would stay with me, I knew the truth. She would decide whether I would continue to exist. His name was not easily pronounced. Even before the door slammed shut, before the silence turned to fear, I had already sensed the change in the air. Alpha straightened up in their seats. Beta stopped whispering. Even the auctioneer, accustomed to dealing with authority, became too rigid. That's how it always started whenever he was mentioned. In the kingdom of Varkon, there were powerful alphas, pack leaders, and respected generals. But above them all stood a single figure who didn't need to assert himself with words. The Alpha King of Black Mountain. Some called him Kale Draven. Others avoided names and preferred titles. The Silent One, the Relentless One, the Unforgiving One. Each version came with a different story, but they all had something in common. No one spoke of him calmly. They said he didn't frequent courts or ceremonies, that he didn't participate in auctions, that he ruled from afar, from atop a fortress nestled in the mountains, where winter never truly receded. A place where only the strongest survived, and where the weak vanished. The stories contradicted each other, but the fear was consistent. Some said that the Alpha King never chose omegas, that he despised bonds, ties, anything that could be interpreted as weakness. Others whispered that no mate had survived long enough to be seen in public. There were worse rumors. Stories whispered in the wards while I cleaned wounds and pretended not to hear. That he had lost something precious in an ancient war. That his fury had frozen along with his heart. That the mountain drank blood. And yet, everyone obeyed. The council trembled before him. The packs adjusted their borders with only a subtle warning. No important decree was issued without considering whether it would displease the king of Black Mountain. He didn't need to show up to govern. His absence was enough. When I heard the murmur echoing through the hall, low, nervous, almost reverent, I understood that something had changed, not because someone had announced their name, but because fear had rearranged itself. My heart tightened in a strange way. If he were there, if that myth were really on the other side of those doors, I didn't know if this meant salvation or damnation. Some destinations are so vast that they don't liberate. They replace one prison with another. And in that instant, without ever having seen his face, I knew, if King Alpha were to look at me, nothing in my life would remain small. The Black Mountain Fortress didn't scream cruelty. It whispered. That's what made it worse. The corridors were wide, cold, made of dark stone that never seemed to warm up, even during the day. Everything there functioned in coordinated silence. Servants moved without looking you in the eye. Guards asked no questions. And I was just another tolerated presence. Not a guest, not a chosen one, just someone who was there. On the first day, I waited to be called. I imagined someone would come and explain the rules, my role, my destiny. Nothing happened. I was left in a small room, away from the main wing, with a simple bed and a window too narrow to let the sun in. The following morning, a maid left folded clothes by the door. Thick, unadorned fabrics, clearly repurposed. They weren't for a companion. They were for someone who should go unnoticed. I began to understand my place. The other omegas arrived later. Beautiful, proud. Some with overly sweet perfumes, others with the rehearsed posture of those who know exactly how to please a powerful alpha. They were led through the main corridors, introduced to the fortress administrators, and praised without restraint. Strong lineage, promising aroma, good posture for producing offspring. I watched from afar, always from afar. On more than one occasion, I have heard my name used as a comparison. At least she's not like the Omega from the auction, said a maid, thinking I wouldn't hear. That one, the forgettable one. Forgettable. The word etched itself into me silently. It didn't hurt immediately. It just stayed there, taking up space. King Alpha would sometimes pass by me, always escorted, always distant. His presence changed the air, made everything heavier. The others straightened up. The conversation ceased. And I felt something strange, almost physical, drawing my attention to him. But he never looked. Never. Not even when I bowed my head in respect. Not even when my hands trembled as I held trays or boxes of herbs. It was as if I didn't exist in his field of vision. And that hurt more than being insulted. There was one night when I thought everything would change. One of the Omegas fell ill. High fever, chills, irregular breathing. The healers of the fortress hesitated, confused. When I approached, they resisted, but despair prevailed. I cared for her in silence. I used what I knew. Simple herbs, compresses, patience. I stayed there until dawn, ignoring the cold and the tiredness. She survived. The next day, I heard murmurs, curious glances. One servant even said that King Alpha had asked who had treated her. My heart raced. Maybe now, maybe finally. But when the name was brought to his attention, the response was cold, indirect, almost perfunctory. Let him continue doing his job. Nothing more than that. Nothing more than that. There was no gratitude. There was no recognition. Only the confirmation that my usefulness did not make me worthy of attention. The petty humiliations continued. I was removed from the main infirmary and sent to care for less wounded patients, far from the more advanced wards. My meals were now served later, when the food was already cold. The other Omegas began to look at me with something between pity and contempt. One of them, Liara, made a point of being kind just enough to hurt. "You're so quiet," he said, smiling. "I even find it admirable. Not everyone can accept their place so well." To accept, as if I had chosen that. There were times when I thought about escaping. I observed routes, guard shifts, rotation times, but something always held me back. Fear. The certainty that if I were captured, my fate would be worse than oblivion. And there were moments, the worst ones, when I thought that perhaps his silence was protection, that perhaps he was watching from afar, testing, waiting for something. That hope almost destroyed me, because each passing day without a word, without a glance, without a gesture, made it clear that I was inventing meaning where there was none. His silence wasn't caution. It was indifference. The final straw came during an official dinner. The Omegas were lined up in the main hall. I was at the end of the line. The Alpha King walked slowly before them, assessing them, choosing who would stand closest, who would be invited to sit at the table. When he passed by me, I felt the air shift, the scent of power, cold and intense. My body reacted before my mind. He didn't stop. He did not hesitate. He did not slow down. It was as if I were part of the shadow. That night, alone in the small room, I cried silently. Not for him. Not exactly, but for the definitive confirmation of something I had been trying to deny since the auction. I wasn't rejected because I wasn't good enough. I was rejected because I was convenient. Because ignoring me had no consequences. Because my pain didn't alter how the world worked. And maybe that was the role I was always meant to have. If at any point in this part of the story you felt anger, hope, or that lump in your throat, leave a like. It shows me that you're enjoying the video and helps me continue bringing you stories like this. After dinner, something changed, not visibly, but noticeable enough to put me on alert. I began to feel lingering stares when I crossed the more secluded corridors. Servants whispered and interrupted their sentences when I approached. It was as if I had become an inconvenient secret. One morning, while organizing bottles in the secondary infirmary, I found a symbol engraved on the door. An ancient sign of protection, used only by the royal lineage. My heart raced. It shouldn't be there. Someone had gone to that space because of me. Before I could touch the symbol, a maid interrupted me, saying that the place was no longer authorized for me. The door was sealed that same day. One night I heard footsteps outside my room. Slow, heavy. They seemed deliberate. I held my breath, waiting for the doorknob to turn. It didn't. The footsteps faded away, but left something behind. The certainty that I was being watched. I thought about running away again. This time, I managed to gather only a few things, hiding them under the mattress. I studied the old map of the fortress, memorizing less frequently used passages. However, in the early morning when I decided to act, the outer gates were closed by direct order of King Alpha. No explanation was given. As if he knew. Liara, in turn, began to gain prominence. She was seen alongside the Alpha King more than once. Servants began to call her their favorite, even without official confirmation. She made a point of crossing paths with me in the hallways, always elegant, always confident. Some of us are born to be seen, she once said. Others, to serve as a contrast. Still, on rare occasions, something almost happened. Once he walked into the infirmary while I was tending to a wounded man. Our eyes almost met. The silence lasted a second longer than usual. My heart raced, but he turned away before I could understand what that meant. The other day, an advisor mentioned an Omega healer in a private meeting. The name wasn't given. The subject was abruptly dropped, and that kept me there, trapped not by chains, but by the fragile hope that the next silence would finally be broken. The truth wasn't hidden because it was fragile. It was hidden because it was dangerous. The manuscript didn't use metaphors. It left no room for interpretation. The words were ancient but too precise to be ignored. My hands trembled as I read, sitting on the cold floor of the Forgotten Fortress library. I wasn't your average Omega. I was a primal bond Omega. According to records, there were very few women capable of connecting directly to the essence of an Alpha King. Not an emotional bond, a bond of containment. These Omegas were not born to produce heirs or strengthen political alliances. They existed to prevent a destructive power from being unleashed. The text was clear. When an Alpha is born with the Black Mountain bloodline, their strength grows beyond control. Without anchoring, they go mad. Without stabilization, they become a threat to the entire kingdom. The anchoring was done by an Omega like me. The healing I offered wasn't learned. It was instinct. My touch didn't just close wounds. It soothed, regulated, sealed. That's why the scarred warriors survived. That's why the fortress existed in isolation. And that was why King Alpha never touched me. If he claimed me before the appointed time, the bond would activate. The connection would unleash the full power of the bloodline, a power the council feared more than any external enemy. That's when everything made sense. The council knew who I was from the start. The auction wasn't a fluke. It was staged. They needed me taken to the fortress without raising suspicion. They needed me to believe I was there by chance. King Alpha knew. He kept me at a distance not out of contempt, but out of resistance. Every silence was an attempt to postpone the inevitable. Every humiliation allowed was a cruel way to convince me to give up on myself. I wasn't imprisoned because I was weak. I was imprisoned because if I left, the entire kingdom could crumble. Now tell me in the comments, do you think he had the right to decide my fate alone? Or should he have told me the truth from the beginning? Knowing the truth didn't set me free. It broke me. I spent days walking around the fortress like a weightless body, repeating mechanical tasks, responding when called, breathing because it was automatic. Everything inside me seemed to have shut down the moment I understood that my life had never been my own. I wasn't rejected by chance. I wasn't forgotten out of blind cruelty. I was used intentionally. And the worst part wasn't the council. It was him. King Alpha knew. He always knew. Every silence, every avoided glance, every tolerated humiliation, it was all part of a restraint that didn't take into account what it did to me. I wasn't the right person for him. I was a liability. It was that night that I decided to stop fighting. Don't run away. Don't confront. Don't beg for explanations that would come too late. Just leave. Even knowing that if I left, something terrible could happen. Perhaps this was my final act of choice. I packed very little. I left behind the herbs I wouldn't take. I cleaned the small room as if I'd never been there. I didn't write a note. I didn't announce anything. People like me leave no trace. When I reached the secondary gate of the fortress, the cold cut into my skin, but no more so than the certainty that accompanied me. If I stayed, I would cease to exist completely. I accepted the rejection. I accepted not being chosen. I accepted that my absence could be more useful than my presence. If the kingdom needed a sacrifice, then let it be a silent one. I took the first step out of the fortress without looking back. And at that moment, I truly believed that no one would come to stop me. I felt it before I heard it. The air around me grew heavy, vibrating as if the mountain itself were awakening. My steps faltered on the ice-covered trail, and for a moment I thought it was just exhaustion taking its toll. But it wasn't. It was him. The barrier had broken. My chest tightened in a strange, almost painful way, as if something invisible had been pulled out of me. I knew in that exact second that what I was, what I had always been, couldn't simply go away without consequences. I heard footsteps behind me, strong, determined, unlike any other sound that had ever echoed in that mountain. When I turned around, he was there. Not like a king, not surrounded by guards. Just him, with eyes gleaming with a raw, dangerous energy that made the world around him seem too small to contain him. "You left," he said. It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement of fact. I laughed. A weak sound, almost without humor. I left, I corrected, because staying meant ceasing to exist. He approached slowly, as if any sudden movement could break me. I was wrong, he said. Not for keeping my distance from you, but for not recognizing you as a person. Those words pierced my defenses with more force than any order could have. He knelt before me, King Alpha, the fear of an entire kingdom, kneeling. I spent years believing that protecting you meant silencing you, he continued. But only now do I understand. The power I feared losing was you. The air exploded around us when he removed the seal from his own brand. I felt the bond forming, warm, deep, inevitable. Not like a prison, like a conscious choice. I don't claim you out of duty, he said, his voice hoarse. I claim you because without you, I am nothing but contained destruction. I closed my eyes for a moment, not because I was weak, but because, for the first time, someone saw everything I was, and still stayed. They had to look at me, not by choice, but because the world they knew had just changed. When we returned to the fortress, I wasn't led through the back corridors. I walked beside him, feeling the bond pulsing firmly, steadily, impossible to ignore. Guards stepped aside, servants lowered their heads. The silence that had previously silenced me now announced me. The council was convened that same evening. The same men who had authorized my auction, who had decided my fate as if I were an administrative problem, now stared at me cautiously. None of them dared to speak first. It was King Alpha who broke the silence. This Omega, he said, placing himself half a step behind me, is not a resource. It is not a restraint. It is not property of the kingdom. I felt his firm hand on my back. She is the reason why this kingdom still exists. There were murmurs, subdued protests. An advisor tried to argue about old laws, about precedents, about social order. He was interrupted by a single glance. The laws that allowed her to be humiliated, Cal continued, don't deserve to continue existing. At that moment, something inside me reorganized itself. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to accuse. I didn't need to prove anything. The truth spoke for itself. Liara was there. For the first time, without an arrogant posture, without a calculated smile. She didn't look at me. She couldn't. The temporary favorite now understood exactly what it had been. A convenient contrast. The decisions came quickly. The auction system was dissolved. Unbound Omegas gained the right to choose, protection, and a voice. Healers were recognized as guardians, not servants. And me? I was not given a throne. I received something bigger. My name was spoken aloud in front of everyone, not as a symbol, not as a tool, but as a woman who survived an entire system and still chose not to destroy it. When it was all over, I was alone for a moment, observing the fortress that had once swallowed me whole. She seemed smaller now, because I no longer existed. If you've made it this far, it's because you understand that some stories aren't just entertainment, they're about emotional justice. Subscribe to the channel, come back often. And thank you so much for walking with me to the end of this story.